All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So welcome to today's session. My name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar. And today we're going to talk about external collaboration, how to safeguard CUI in a FedRAMP-authorized GCC High cloud. So before I dive into the presentation, just going to cover a few housekeeping details. So today's webinar will last 30 minutes. That does include Q&A. Now, we got a number of questions submitted prior to today's session, so those are the ones I'll be covering. If we do have an outage today, just wait for a minute and try to refresh your screen. Or if that doesn't work, you can use that same link you receive via email to come back into the session. If at any time you'd like to speak with one of our Exostar managed Microsoft experts, if you have any additional questions about Exostar or our solutions, you can reach out to us a couple of different ways. You can email us at managedmicrosoft365@exostar.com, or you can come to our website, www.exostar.com. There's a chat feature there on every page, and we'd be more than happy to answer your questions via that medium as well. Now, if one of your questions is, will I be receiving the slide deck from today? The answer is yes. So after today's session, as a follow-up to everyone who registered, you'll receive both a copy of the slide deck and a link to the recording of today's presentation. So with that, let me dive into the presentation and demonstration. So just a quick statistic about how procurement organizations want to strengthen relationships with their supply base. And in most cases, this is if you will, God, sorry, lost my train of thought there. So the way they want to strengthen those relationships is through a tighter collaboration relationship with those third-party suppliers. They want to be able to share both POs and information about the products and services that they're delivering. They want to get that feedback loop done. However, as we know, in the A&D space, there are particular requirements about how to do that and what we cannot share, how we do it, etc. At the end of the day, we need a compliant environment. We need that security that is necessary to meet those CMMC requirements around controlled unclassified information, but we also need a system that's easy to use. So what I'm going to talk about today is Exostar's solution for that secure collaboration, utilizing Microsoft Teams up in GCC High, but managed and supported by Exostar and the way we enable that kind of collaboration to occur. So what we're talking about is what Microsoft and Andy Isaac talk about as a meet me tenant. This is separate from your corporate tenant. Oftentimes, when you start thinking about splitting off the organization for those who work with CUI and those who don't, those third parties who I need to work with or want to provide information to, etc. How do I do that securely? Oftentimes, right, as Microsoft tells us, we could just invite those folks into our team's environment and work with them there. However, you then are at risk for oversharing. You need to consider how you know that those third parties meet the requirements when they log in, making sure that you have a trust relationship with them, that they follow all the same kinds of policies, procedures, etc. If they have issues in using things, connecting, etc., do I burden my internal IT staff with those things? And so how do I also support those third-party users as I would my own users? And for that, like I said, what's typically recommended is what's called a meet me tenant. Many of the older folks out there, like myself, really think of this as a corporate extranet. It is that Switzerland It's outside my corporate environment, but that's where I work with my trusted third parties. This is an air-gap tenant, totally separate from my corporate tenant, and I need to explicitly invite people into it. I'm going to explicitly invite them into particular areas where I'm going to work with that particular partner in that area. And we're going to offer this out as a service to the different companies out there. So the way Exostar implements this is really by marrying up kind of three key capabilities. One of the things we're going to do is stand up a Microsoft Teams environment, and we're then going to embed both an Exostar application, and we're going to layer on top Exostar's identity and access management piece. So you can easily work with those third parties. Exostar will take on, if you will, the burden of that trust relationship, ensuring that those users are using the right credentials, that those organizations are explicitly invited into the Exostar community. You're then going to manage that tenant and those users, but Exostar is going to, well, actually, you're going to manage the kind of the spaces within the tenant, but Exostar is going to manage and support the overall tenant itself. Exostar is going to configure that tenant. We're going to embed an application in there to put the guardrails around that tenant so you can both easily administer it for your users and your third parties. But Exostar will do the monitoring, the SOC, the NOC capabilities around that tenant, etc. Now, the way this works in practice is as you see here. So this is the solution architecture. It's a standalone tenant. We also do have an SMB model for those organizations that are, say, 75 users or less. That uses a shared tenant model. They work the same, and from what you'll see in my demonstration today, it is at the end of the day just a shared tenant versus a single tenant. But for our larger enterprises, it's a single tenant stood up and managed by Exostar. It has an Exostar application embedded within it. That Exostar application is what's going to govern the user invitation, team creation. It enforces particular custom roles within the tenant. There's only 3 available to you. One of those is a sponsor admin. Those are the folks from your organization who are going to manage the space for your company. You've got access to reporting and auditing within the tenant. You can stand up teams, invite people in, etc. There's another role that's a team manager role, so you can create a space, make somebody a team manager in that space, and then allow them to invite others into that space, etc. And then the other role is a member. Now, the entire system is set up as a least privileged access system. So, individuals don't get access to the environment until you invite them in. When you invite them in, they only get access to those explicit team spaces that you've invited them into. They don't see any of the other team spaces out there. The active monitoring, the security, etc., that's all done by Exostar and our tech ops and our support teams. Those tech ops folks from Exostar and the Exostar support team are U.S. citizens in the U.S., so it also meets those ITAR requirements that you may have for this kind of information. Within the tenant itself, 85 of those 110 NIST 800-171 controls are done by Exostar and then flowed down to you. And then those other 25 controls are a shared responsibility to you. Now, the way this works is that your users who aren't involved in CUI or when they're working with things that are not CUI, in those cases, they're going to work in their regular everyday systems, right? If you've got, say, M365 commercial, that's where they're going to get their email, and that's where they're going to work on those documents and those kinds of things that aren't CUI. But when they want to work with CUI, they're going to go into their web browser. They're going to go into the Meet Me tenant. That's where they're going to go into those individual team spaces, and they're going to work on that information there in the browser. So that's why that audit compliance boundary that you see is just around the tenant itself. They're going to work there. That's where they're going to use the Microsoft applications, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, etc. Same thing if you want to bring in those third parties. You're going to invite them into particular team spaces. That's where they're going to get CUI. That's where they're going to be able to work on it, share it, work on it with you, etc. Now, this Exostar application, besides just putting in the custom roles and things like that, is also going to provide additional features that, once again, try to maintain that corporate boundary or that audit and compliance boundary. Two of those key features, one is the ability to create a mailbox for a team space. We call this our compliant file drop capability. It's the ability to create that mailbox at a team level and then send information into the tenant or have anybody send information in, so it doesn't have to come into your boundary. It goes directly into the tenant up in GCC High, and that's again where you can move the information around securely, share it out with others. You can send information from this tenant as well through an egress feature in that same capabilities. The other thing we've done is to block download within a team space. So you can, again, to just make sure that the CUI doesn't leak from the system, you can put a block download on a team space. So again, all that information is going to stay there within the tenant, and people are only going to work with it there within their browser. Now, we have what I just talked about was what we typically call ad hoc collaboration. I want to create team spaces, then those individuals are going to work in those team spaces, but they can kind of work however they want to. What we also offer as an adjunct capability to what I just talked about was a module within this that's called supplier collaboration. Supplier collaboration allows you to create a folder and file structure when you want to always have kind of the same format, the same method, the same kind of documents that you're going to share with those companies that you collaborate around with. This is typically used for the larger organizations out there that have a method of working with their supply chain partners. These are often things, maybe you have a supplier scorecard that you want to share out. Maybe you have other document types, POs, design specs, etc., that you want to always send out to one or more companies at the same time, create a library of these things, etc. So we offer both structured and unstructured collaboration. I'm going to focus on the unstructured collaboration as part of the demonstration. But follow this space, and we'll have another session where we talk more specifically about that supplier collaboration module as well. So with that, let me dive in and actually show you how this works. So as I mentioned, we're in Microsoft Teams. So I'm logged in as Adam Spark. Adam Spark is Exostar's customer. He works for a company called Glory Minerals. Glory Minerals, again, that's the Exostar customer, and Adam Spark is that sponsor administrator role for Glory Minerals. And so he manages this space for them. He's the one who creates users, creates the team structure, invites them into those individual teams, and then they can kind of do their own thing within those teams once they're brought on board. So as that administrator, Adam gets to do those administrative type capabilities. He can go ahead and look up, say there's a I've got a user I need to remove from the system because we've stopped working on that with her from this particular partner. So we have a partner called Granger Systems. Emma Jackson is, is moving off a project. These are the projects she's currently a part of. Well, she's actually, removed from all projects currently. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete that user. That removes her from all these teams. It removes her from access into this particular environment. I could obviously then invite others, and I'll do that as part of the demonstration to show you how that's done. But we can obviously, add and remove users as you would expect in a SaaS application. I can determine those third parties I want to work with, right? I can also create additional admins. When I want to work with another third party, I can bring in those domains and start to add in users from those, all from here within the M365. So to add a partner domain, I just put in their domain at exostar.com, and then I can start to add users from that. Now, these users are going to leverage the Exostar identity and access solution, our managed access gateway. Many of you use that today to access things like managed Microsoft 365 for others. You may use it to get to various supply chain portals. You may have been asked to fill out a questionnaire about your cybersecurity compliance from an application behind MAG, etc. So those credentials you can leverage also to get into managed Microsoft 365 from a partner when invited. So those folks are going to come in that way. We can also delete teams or archive teams. The major difference is just that when you delete a team, it is deleted. We're going to, that's going to be hard deleted from the system. You won't be able to access it. If you archive a team, you'll be able to restore that team, and you'll be able to restore the data and structure of that team, but then you'd have to add users. So basically an archive is just removing users from that team so they no longer have access to the data. Now, I can also get out various reports from the system. If I need to find out what happened to a particular file or a particular area within my team space, I can go ahead and run that SharePoint audit report against a particular team space. This is going to give me, all the different kinds of actions around a particular file in that Grainger Systems team space, all the actions that occurred on a particular file or a particular area within the space for the last 24 hours. This is going to be downloaded to my system as an Excel spreadsheet, and it'll show me those things. I can also see all the actions that this Exostar app did over, a defined time across all teams, a particular team, etc. So this starts to provide those diagnostics if you want to get information about what occurred in the system. Now, again, Exostar is running the SOC and NOC in the background. So if there is, a major breach, big problem, etc., Exostar takes on the responsibility again of those reports and notifying the particular agencies, etc. That's all part of the service of monitoring and auditing this particular system. But if you need to get information out of it, you can as well. Now, one of the key things this user would do would be create those teams and invite those users, because that's where the work itself is going to get done. These team spaces are created by you, so you can set these up like by partner. So one of our partners is Grainger Systems. So we created a project space just for them. We have other vendors like Boeing. We created spaces for them, but then we may have others that are created on a per project or per product basis as well. All of that is kind of determined by you and the way you want to manage this space. So to do that, we're going to again use that Exostar app because we want to create those guidelines or those guardrails that allow us to maintain those, those controls in place. So I'm going to create a new team for a new project that's kicking off for Glory Minerals. It's called Project High Point. It's going to be a 12-month project, and we're going to go ahead and create that team. Now, once this team is created, Right now, the only person that has access to this is Adam. In order to bring people into that, I'm going to use the invitation process. And I can invite, one person or a group of people. So I'm going to invite them to that team space. I've got a delimited list of users, some from my organization, some from outside my organization. I'm going to look these users up in our identity solution, Exostar's Managed Access Gateway. I see that Yahoo, somebody I want to invite from a social domain, that domain isn't yet authorized. I could authorize that domain and invite this person in. They're not going to be authenticated or anything from Yahoo. They're going to come to Exostar. They're going to register for their account. They're going to create their multi-factor authentication. And only then would they then get into Managed Microsoft 365. I've got some other users that are already part of the system, right? These are users that exist here in Managed Microsoft 365. There are some people from my company, right, Glory Minerals. So I can invite them as that team manager role. So I'm going to let Maya manage this High Point project space ongoing. So she doesn't have to come back to me to do things like invite more users, remove this person from the team, etc. Maya can do all that on her own without having coming back to a central person to do that. There are a couple other people that they're part of organizations that are authorized to come in, but they don't yet have accounts in Exostar. So this is going to send them an invite to Manage Microsoft 365. It's going to direct them to first create that account. They're going to register. They're going to set up their multi-factor authentication. When they come into Exostar, they'll then see that they have access to Manage Microsoft 365. And then when they, come into Manage Microsoft 365, they'll see only that one team. So they'll only have access to that High Point team space when they come into the system. Because again, this is all on a least privileged access setup. Now, once this team is created, I can do some additional items. I can add in those additional controls. So, for example, right, I've got I have a team space that I created a while ago to help this company. It's called CUI Inbox. This is a central place where people can send CUI to Glory Minerals without it going into their corporate environment. I enabled this by enabling team file drop here in the space. I enabled that function, and then that creates a file drop inbox for people to send information to us. So the project High Point materials were sent to this by Kevin Hancock, right? I used my exostar.com email address, and I sent files into the system. These files, when they came in, that's when they're checked for viruses, malware, etc. And I can then export them into the team's environment, and I'll actually then move them over to that team I just created, right? Because that's where those individuals that are assigned to that particular project are going to be working, and I want to be able to get them the information that they want to. Now, anybody with a team manager role of that team space can see these mailboxes that exist if you enable it. So in this case, it's going through a central person, Adam, but others could be doing that. Now these files are now actually in the, a file storage area of CUI Inbox. I'm going to go ahead and delete these images. These are from my signature block at Exostar. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these. Yeah, delete those files. I'm then going to move these other files, including that email message. Email message itself might be CUI or might be important context of how these came in. So I'm going to move these over to that High Point project. So I'm going to go more places. And then I'll go ahead and go into there. Put it into the general library. And I'm going to move these files. they're going to move from that CUI inbox team, and then they'll get over to that. Let me do that, over to that high point team. That's over here. And again, that's where the work for this particular project will get done. Only those people who were invited in are going to see that this team exists or have access to these particular files. Now, it often takes a little bit for the file area to get created, so it may not be there yet, but SharePoint in the background is working on this. I've got other files over here with a bunch of files in them. And again, we're going to keep these here in the browser. We're going to use the Microsoft tools here within the browser to edit, make changes, etc. Again, just making sure that all the information stays here in the browser and we don't, download it into our corporate environment and, if you will, break that boundary. Now, the way I, made sure that people couldn't put that information or make that information downloadable was just as I set up that CUI inbox in this team space, I also created additional permissions, and I was able to, there we go. I can block download on any of these teams I create. So again, we're just trying to shrink that boundary, and we're trying to make sure we keep the CUI there and allow people to work within it. So this secure collaboration is just one of the Exostar solutions. If you are on that CMMC journey, Exostar has a complete suite of CMMC products that can help you get ready. We also have a number of supply chain solutions if you want to do additional collaboration with supply chain, like around a supply chain portal. We also can link to those existing supply chain portals and pull down that information proactively for you. So as I mentioned, we did get some questions in, so I do want to spend a couple minutes covering these. So for number one, if U.S. employees need access to emails from both commercial and international domain, they don't want to carry two mobile phones, will MS Outlook Mobile allow emails from both domains? So this is both a technical question and a policy question. So technically, you can configure an Outlook client to get emails from really anywhere and display it, or from any email system, and bring it and show it to you and display it on a device. Now, whether or not you allow that to be, that's what's going to be determined by what kind of device management policy you have in place. So number two, curious if many companies in the DIB use a hybrid Microsoft tenant or enclave, where CUI users use the GCC High licenses, are able to interact with users from the same company that have 365 business licenses. So there are a number of companies that use a hybrid method that have two domains, both a commercial and a GCC High. But the key element there is, how do you want them to interact? So typically, right, this is where it kind of starts to break down a little bit. As long as you maintain the CUI, you could invite others in there, but you're going to have to give them an account in there. So I guess it depends both what do you mean by able to collaborate and how and interact, right? They could certainly send email messages back and forth. They can certainly schedule meetings back and forth. They can work on a Teams meeting, etc. But in order to actually work in that Teams environment, you would typically need an account in both. Now, you could use an Azure B2B connection. They don't always work great between GCCI and commercial, so that's also going to kind of depend. So how can we configure classification labels for CUI within GCC High? So Microsoft, so the typical way to configure classification labels with Microsoft technologies is using, I believe it's the Purview application that comes oftentimes with, it is part of some of your GCC High licenses. And that's where you would configure classification labels for the different document types you might have. Will CMMC Level 2 continue to use NIST 800-171 V2 now that V3 is available? Yes, it will. Currently, it explicitly calls out V2. There will be a time or a change at some point in time, but there's been no indication of when that might be. Is GCC High 100% mandatory for CMMC Level 2? The answer is no. CMMC can be implemented in a number of different ways with a number of different technologies. It doesn't require Azure GCC High, doesn't require Microsoft, number of different things you can do. What about pen testing and who needs to do it? Pen testing is a good idea for any company to do. It should be part of your security plan. Whether or not you need to do it is kind of based on your risk and whether or not you have a policy or procedure around doing pen testing as part of your system security plan. Is there any way around requiring GCC High for Level 2 for small businesses? Again, there is. You absolutely can implement, again, CMMC Level 2 without Microsoft GCC High. Number of different, again, technologies, procedures, etc. And so it's really up to you on how you want to implement that system security plan. So everyone, I want to thank you for your time and attention today. Hope this was able to answer your questions. If not, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to answer other questions you might have. Thanks so much for your time and have a great rest of the day.